Coming, and I'd like to ask our guest panelists if they would take a seat at the table right here. If I could get Ollie and Kathy, if you would. Sit here. Thank you. Madam Clerk, I want to call this committee to order. It's kind of a unique committee today because I've asked that we have representatives from our Ethics Commission be present. And we're lucky to have Commissioner Pack with us today representing the Ethics Commission, and then from the elections, rules and elections, we have Mr. Labange and Mr. Weezar, so we have a quorum. Do you need to make an opening statement, or can I just have at it?
Today's meeting, the agenda item is relative to the City of Los Angeles Municipal Elections Reform Commission's final report.
Okay. So again, I want to thank all of you for coming. I have two cards at this point from the public, so I'm going to call them up first, and that's Doug Fitzsimmons and Andrew Douglas. Please come up. And Doug, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Mr.
Oh, I have another one, Grace. So go right ahead.
Okay. My name is Doug Fitzsimmons. I'm president of the South Robertson Neighborhoods Council. My neighborhood council holds this issue particularly near and dear to their heart, and are pleased to file a community impact statement, which hopefully are attached to your packets today. If not, it is available online. I don't want to go through all 18 points that we're suggesting, but I do want to draw attention to the last item, which is after we go through the process of fine-tuning our election process, we really need to spend time as a community, as a city, as a county, to work on developing a better informed electorate. An electorate that understands how government works and why it works the way it does. The ideas that we have for that are just a beginning, but we certainly would like to start with more education programs earlier in the schools so that students grow up committed to community service and committed to their city.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to just let everybody know that we had, before I call you, Andrew, that we have some community college students that are with us today. And if you guys could stand up, and just stand up. I think that I salute your instructor, your professor, and I'm really glad to see so many young people here to be engaged. And as this goes on, if you have some questions, maybe through you, sir, we could ask them. So anyway, I want to welcome you. So if I could have Mr. Labange.
Say hello to the Huskies. Huskies from East LA. East Los Angeles Huskies. Good to see you.
He knows everything.
I'm a City College Cub. But it's good to see community colleges here. Very nice introduction, Mr. President.
Thank you. So if I could have Andrew Douglas, please come up.
Thank you, Council President Weston. I work with Trade Tech, so go Beavers. So I appreciate the opportunity to briefly speak on behalf of some of these recommendations. There's a great equation that's used for the psychology of voter turnout, which is that the likelihood of voting equals the motivation to vote times the ability to vote divided by the difficulty of voting. So the idea of incentivizing and disincentivizing and using those two counterweights off each other is interesting to compel people to show up and vote. But I think to clear away a lot of the disincentives would actually go a long way to create an atmosphere where they were in fact more incentivized. So shore up what's there, I would say recommend that. 45% of the ballots cast last year were mail-in. There's some best practices elsewhere where they accept mail-in ballots until the day of election, as long as they're stamped, and have it 3 days later, and then expand that program. That's important for the elderly. And then also, I think I'd like to temper the conversation about number of voters versus making sure that they're informed. I'm not, if there's an 80% turnout, but it's an uninformed electorate, I'm not sure where that leaves us. So along the way, I think it's important to shore up this age group too, which research has totally shown that once they start voting at that age, they're lifers. They're more, they'll vote more and more throughout the course of their life, and they'll spread it. Also, the closer the race, the bigger the turnout. So I think that speaks again to like informing the process. And in last year's elections, there was one that was decided by 700 votes, another one that was decided by 500 votes. I mean, I think if there was some really adequate education given, that'd be great on that. So I'd engage the world of philanthropy and work on tech solutions, and I would definitely restore government and civics in schools. If somebody at some point has to explain to them that on any given day there's blood in the streets somewhere in the world to fight for this wonderful privilege that we have here. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you so much. And I want the folk here to understand, I have these general public comment cards, and I'm taking them now, but I am not closing public comment. So something may occur, and some of you that haven't had an opportunity to speak may want to speak later. You will be afforded that opportunity. But if I could call Grace now and John after Grace.
Good evening, Council President Wesson and council members, Commissioner Peck, and fellow citizens of Los Angeles. My name is Grace Yu, and I'm the Executive Director at the Korean American Coalition. We're a community advocacy organization that believes civic engagement is the only way to become true American citizens, by being an integral part of the society. And as such, we encourage the city's recommendation of having the odd year elections in sync with the state and federal elections, so that instead of having it in odd years in March and May, to have it in the even years in the June and November primaries to track, so that more people will come out to vote. As you all know, there have been studies showing that the percentages that come out to vote once you've switched over is extremely high. For us, it would pretty much double the percentage numbers. Last year's 2013 election, our percentages was 23% turnout. I believe simply by moving the date, we would have at least 50%. And so we wouldn't be the laughing stock of this nation when it comes out to civic participation. And unfortunately, I have not been able to read the rest of the entire recommendation, so that is all I will speak to. Thank you very much.
But there will be time. We're going to have a hearing next week as well, and then I think it'll come to this committee, and then a recommendation will be passed on to the council. We thank you for coming in. Before I call John, I want to thank the Los Angeles Neighborhood Council Coalition, the Downtown Los Angeles Neighborhood Council, and the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment for helping us put this together. So, John, I'm going to have you come up. You'll be the last speaker from the public during this segment, and then we'll go to our panelists.
Thank you, Council President. I'm in favor of combining the elections, but really what I want to speak to is something that may be a little counterintuitive. By definition, the 15 members sitting around this horseshoe are 15 of the 20 top people in terms of being able to identify what the public wants and desires, and becoming a councilman requires two skills. It requires the ability to get elected, which means you can identify what your districts have and what they need, and you can identify a way of speaking to the members of your district. It also requires the ability to govern. I think the city council members, in and of themselves, could do a better job of relating to the public the importance of getting out the vote. And I think of all the members in the city, probably these 15 people could do the best job of relating to the electorate and allowing them to understand the importance of coming out and voting. Thank you.
No, thank you, John. And I want Doug and Elsa to know I'll be calling on you, but I would like to get some opening statements from the panelists that are here today. And I want to thank again all of you. Derry Schrago, who is highly respected and has been in this business for a while. Dan Schnurr, who I met back in Sacramento, where I met Derry, highly respected and a professor at USC. We have LMU represented, and Fernando Guerra, always active. And we have actual representative from the 2020 Commission, and Kathy Fang that's here today. And I want to start, if I might, with you, Kathy, and if you could tell us a couple of things at this point. I think your organization, Common Cause, may have taken a position. If you could talk about how you got to that point, and then tell us a little bit about how the 2020 Commission, which was independent commission convened by me, I guess. But anyway, Kathy, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Kathy Fung, California Common Cause, also with the 2020 Commission, and also spent more hours than I care to admit with the Municipal Elections Reform Commission with Fernando Guerra. So I will just say that actually for many, many years, Common Cause has been looking at this issue of voter turnout during the city elections, and we certainly had worked with City Council member Huizar to think about how we could stimulate that with a number of changes. And at the time, we were actually keen to look at the election date, but we're very open to what date that might be. And sitting on the LA 2020 Commission as well as the Municipal Elections Reform Commission, I think that the conversation always started with let's look at the broadest possible number of choices, and then start looking at what the studies say, what the actual statistical data shows, and start to narrow in on the things that will have the most impact. For us, our initial survey of the possible choices that we could look at to change voter turnout, one rose to the top, and that was changing the election date. Now, it's clear that when you ask any voter, including, frankly, myself, what is election day, it's really hard for people to remember that it's on a random March and May in an odd year, right? Because only recently we changed that from April and June, so it's even harder because it's not intuitive. It's not when people think of as election day. We thought to look at both June and November of the odd year as well as June and November of the even year, with the thinking that if we looked at the odd year, maybe you get people into a pattern, but you're not competing with the national or the state elections. We looked at between 2002 and 2010, there are a number of cities that start to switch from their oddball date to June, November of either the even year and odd year. And in surveying those cities, what we found was that for those who chose to move to even year, June and November, their voter turnout jumped, as Ms. Yu said, doubled. And even when you look at the percentage of voters who are still voting down the ballot on city election issues and city election candidates, even with the drop-off, because we know that people are coming out for a big presidential election and they might get past the propositions and they might not get to the city council races, but even with the drop-off, that the increase in the percentage turnout was still in the 20% range. So if you're looking at a city like Los Angeles that had below 25% turnout, we could see a jump to 40%. And that's still lower than the national turnout of 65, but it's very good, right? It's better. When we looked at city turnout for elections where the city had moved their elections to June, November of the odd year, the bump was not as great. In fact, probably the bump was only the 5 to 10%. So,
Could you repeat that? This is when they're moved to
if you move to the odd year, June, November elections, there is a bump, but the bump was not as great. And when I say not as great, it ranged anywhere between 5 and 10% more than, on average, what Los Angeles is seeing. I think there may be other reasons for considering odd-year elections, but if we're thinking about voter turnout as our primary reason for wanting to change the election date, then synchronizing our election with the statewide elections, June, November of the even year, will have the greatest impact. And we can go through the studies and all these other things, but there have been a number of studies that have tried to factor out all sorts of other reasons that might impact on turnout. And time again, what those academics come back to is that the election day timing, the day that we choose to hold our elections, is significant. I will just say that most recently, there's been a number of things that have cemented this concept for us. Folks will remember very recently Ferguson has gone through a lot of racial turmoil. And one of the things that people noted was that their city council was very not representative in terms of racial diversity. And when people looked a little bit more deeply, they realized that their elections were not scheduled at a time that was synchronized with the state and with the state general elections. And a lot of people say, that might have been a purposeful choice, but certainly what happens is that it depresses voter turnout. We also see in Bell, and there's a number of other cities in Los Angeles where there have been conscious decisions to move their election date to oddball dates, right, off cycle. And we see time and time again that results in very low turnout and can result in a city council that's less in touch with voters. So we think for a whole variety of reasons, it's why I think without me having to debate this matter, whether it was the 2020 Commission or the Municipal Elections Reform Commission, there was always a really strong consensus that moving the election date to synchronize with statewide elections just makes sense. You can spend all your effort on a whole lot of things, but you don't need to spend your effort trying to remind people what election day is.
Well, thank you. I hope I understand you have other things to do, but if you could hang around as long as you could, it would be appreciated.
Can I just say one thing?
Yes, of course you can.
I just think it's a sprint, because everything's a sprint in life now. Sunday becomes Monday, becomes Sunday again. I would even consider having the first or second week of September, the election, and in November. I don't know. I mean, you go from June and it's real quiet. You start campaigning in May, June, and then you have that election, and then boom, you turn it right around. That was the only thing. And the other thing too, Mr. President,
go right ahead.
I think we should go with the federal officials, the state officials, the the county officials, then the city, and then the propositions as far as that, whether it's statewide, so that you have that. Thank you.
Well, if that's what it takes to get Los Angeles City to have a sensible election date, we will work with you on the statewide election laws to try to make that happen.
It's just an idea.
I'm sure
I agree.
Councilmember President Wesson, you've got lots of relationships up there too, but we would stand side by side with you to make sure that the ballot put the city elections in the proper order.
Right, and the last thing, there's 88 cities in the county of Los Angeles, San Gabriel being the oldest. That's where we came from. We all walked 9 miles from the
Yeah, I
San
remember.
Gabriel. You remember. So what city in the county or in Southern California is the best in voting, if you know, just in your thoughts, or if you have one of those things you put in your hand and you ask the question, But I won't answer it now, but that's something to know. What is a model? Is Long Beach real good?
No.
Okay. Is Santa Monica real good?
No, the best one is Alhambra here in LA County,
That's
only
good.
because it has it in November.
Oh.
Got it. Okay.
And Mr. Labange, I would think that there would be a possibility of working with our colleagues in Sacramento to do something maybe based on the population of cities,
Right.
and depending on if that's over a certain threshold, that maybe there's a way. We'd have to check out the cost or whatever. But I see ways that could be investigated. So now to Mr. Chairman, who I want to thank you for your hard work. I know it was a lot of head-banging issues, but Mr. Guerra, who I understand is you have an announcement? You might
Yes, my wife had twins about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Did you register to vote yet?
Yeah.
He's working on that. So if you could just kind of give us your thoughts, and we'll work down
Yes.
the table.
Thank you. Fernando Guerra, Loyola Marymount University, where I am a professor of Chicano Studies and a professor of political science. Councilman Huizar, Councilman LaBonge, and President Wesson, I want to thank you and the mayor for the opportunity to serve on this commission. I actually had a lot of fun and learned quite a bit. I've been teaching this stuff for 30 years, and, like a typical professor, thought I knew it all, but I really did learn from the other commission members, especially a lot of practical aspects to this. One quick point, we do have low turnout, but when you take a look at it from a national perspective of major cities that have their elections on a non-presidential or gubernatorial election, we are not at the bottom. We are actually closer to the middle than to the bottom. And so while we have problems, this is a problem that urban America faces. So cities like Long Beach or Dallas are way below us. Ferguson, that Kathy mentioned, had something like a 12% turnout for their city elections, while the same population, when they voted in November, were over 60%.
Get out of
So
here.
a very stark difference. So this is not a uniquely Los Angeles problem. It's exacerbated in Los Angeles, I believe, because we are a one-party city. Only 16% of registered voters now are Republican. So we are a heavily Democratic city. In terms of views, we are a heavily liberal city. And in terms of wedge issues, we have very few wedge issues within Los Angeles, so we have great consensus on the major issues that you typically hear on the national level. In addition, we don't have the exclusion of racial or ethnic minorities, meaning that African Americans and Latinos have been incorporated both in terms of voters and elected officials, and as have women, even though there's only one on the city council, and Asians, that's a difficult issue for the city council in terms of representation, even though we've had one council member of Asian descent. But there certainly are some communities that are excluded, but in terms of the large, major ethnic groups, they have not been excluded. Therefore, no competition, no ideological differences, no wedge issues, and no racial contention means that you have less to come out and vote for. And I think, on the one hand, we do want consensus. We do want... We don't want racial issues. I like to remind everybody that the highest turnout that the city had was in 1969, when many people came to vote for Tom Bradley, and many people came to vote against Tom Bradley. And that was a very racially divided city. Now, I'm setting up a false dichotomy here. Do you want a racially divided city with high turnout, or a city like today with low turnout? And I know that's a false dichotomy in a sense, but just to kind of give the example of what's happening in the city of Los Angeles and other major cities that have these similar trends. So what I'm saying is that there's a lot of major trends and good reasons why we're seeing the decline of turnout, not only in Los Angeles, but throughout urban America. We had 33 recommendations in the commission. Let me just tell you that recommendation number 1, to move the elections to June and November of the even year, have a greater impact than the recommendations number 2 through 33 combined. In other words, if we just implemented recommendation number 1 and not any of the others, that we would still increase turnout, as Kathy said, quite a bit. But if we didn't implement recommendation number 1, but we implemented recommendations number 2 to 33, we wouldn't even have half of the increase in turnout. And so now, why did we recommend recommendations 2 through 33? Is that individually they all make sense. They do impact hundreds of people, sometimes even thousands of people, but not enough people to move the turnout needle by 1%. And many of them are very important and symbolically, as one of the speakers just said in public comment, we want to get rid of the difficulty of voting and obstacles, and many of those recommendations that we have there get rid of a lot of those obstacles that do impact several people. We did recommend, as one of the speakers requested, that we accept absentee voters even after Election Day, as long as they're postmarked before Election Day. We did recommend that we have civic classes and that we engage younger people. So we made all those recommendations. At the end of the day, however, there is no magic bullet in recommendations 2 through 33. Okay? We believe that recommendation number 1 is the one that will get you to the greatest turnout if that is the goal. In addition, besides moving the election date, there were 2 other ideas that I want to briefly mention, but that the Commission didn't consider. One, of course, is internet voting. We did not consider that or talk about that because it requires the Secretary of State to certify any type of internet voting procedure. And I think Dan is much better talking about that. But just to say that there was no reason for us to talk about that when even if we made a recommendation, we would not be able to implement it until the state allowed us to do that. And we believe that that would have an impact on turnout, especially for young people, to allow some form of internet voting. And we know there are major issues with that are being discussed. The third idea, moving the elections, internet voting, is the whole idea of a lottery. Now, many people think this is a silly idea, but it actually has the potential to have a great discussion about what is the informed voter, what do we mean by democracy, what do we mean by engagement. And the reason the Commission really didn't talk about this is many of us on the Commission believed that this is something that local government or government shouldn't do. We commend the Ethics Commission for talking about this, but we were uncomfortable with the city necessarily running the lottery. Our idea would be that if such a thing were discussed, that we would have a nonprofit run that, and therefore we're not spending any public funds. Because one of the major, among other opposition to it would be that we would be using public funds for this type of idea. So in conclusion, there is no magic bullet other than moving the election to June and November of the even years, and we still nonetheless would like to see the other 32 recommendations for symbolic purposes, for the fact that it will impact several voters given certain situations, that those also be adopted. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for all of your hard work. We would like to maybe, after we hear from everyone, talk a little bit more about the voter lottery. And with that said, I'd like to move to Dan Schnur, an independent individual who I have always had great respect for because he's borderline brilliant. So I'd like to hear from you, Mr. Schnur.
Well, Mr. President, thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much for the kind words. My students at USC got their midterms back today, so that is the nicest thing anyone has said about me all day, and so I'm very flattered. But I also want to
apologize for the other night where the football player was acting like a center fielder trying to catch a ball, but the guy from Arizona State jumped in front of him. It was heartbreaking.
We're going to get to that in just 1 second, Mr. Labange. But I want to thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank Council Members Huizar and Labange for gathering us here for this critical conversation. And before I get started, I just want to echo the comments you made earlier in appreciation of the attendance of the students from East Los Angeles. The discussion we're having today is really about your future. And students have classes, students have homework, students have jobs, and the fact that they're taking time away from those very busy schedules to participate in this discussion about the future of our democracy, their democracy, is tremendous. And you guys deserve all of our admiration. Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah.
As President Wesson mentioned, my name is Dan Schnur, and I'm the director of the Jess Unruh Institute of Politics at the University of Southern California. My job there is to get USC students interested, engaged, and motivated to participate in politics, government, and public service. I like to say that I have the third best job at USC after that of our university president and our football coach. Toward Mr. Labange's earlier comments this week, I have the second best job at the University of Southern California. I have little to add to what Kathy and Fernando have already said about the importance of consolidating local elections to be on the ballot with state and or national elections in an even-numbered years. I'm more than happy as the conversation progresses to spend some time ridiculing the criticism for that suggestion. I think it's of critical importance, and I'm certainly happy to talk about it in more detail later. Like Fernando, I also give great credit to the Ethics Commission for the fine work that they do. Unlike Fernando, I have some concerns about the idea of a lottery for reasons we can discuss going forward. But what I want to spend just a moment or two on before allowing my friend Gary Srago to speak is I want to get to the core question of voter turnout, because I think for all the discussions we have, and they're valuable discussions about voting hours, early voting days, other ways of making voting easier and more convenient, I worry that we're only addressing one portion of the issue, and in fact not the most important aspect of the issue, because as important as it is to make voting more convenient, the core matter here is not how easy it is to vote, but rather motivating people to want to vote. And one of the members of the public, when he spoke, made exactly the right point on behalf of civics expanded and enhanced civics education in Los Angeles schools as the key to not just making it more convenient, but to motivating young Angelinos to participate in the political process going forward. In my years of teaching, both at SC and at Cal, I've watched this millennial generation. And I've seen a lot in watching them, and I've learned a lot from them. We know that the millennial generation votes in smaller numbers than any other generation in America today. And so it's very easy to dismiss them as not caring. Give them their iPads, give them their Kardashians, they will be perfectly happy and to go through their lives that way. But the truth is, I think, as you know, President Weston, is much more complicated than that. Because this millennial generation, these young people that vote in smaller numbers than any other generation in America today also volunteer their time back into their communities in greater numbers than any other generation in American history. And I think it's worth taking just a minute or two to consider why that dichotomy exists. Why is it that an entire generation of young people who will devote hours and hours every week to community cleanups, to neighborhood watches, to teaching at-risk kids to read, to bring meals to shut-in seniors, why is it that those same young people won't take 15 minutes every 2 years to vote? And there's a lot of answers to that. Most of my students don't have their own super PACs, and that gets into a conversation about campaign finance reform. There's a discussion to be had about the polarization of politics at the state and national level. But I'd go back further. I'd go back a little bit further to what we teach these young people, or more accurately, what we don't teach these young people long before they get to SC or to Cal or to Loyola or to East LA. Or UCLA. Where? It's a pleasant little junior college over in Westwood. I'll tell you more about it later.
Balance, that's all.
Most California high school students are required to volunteer a certain number of hours before they can graduate from high school. Mandatory volunteerism. That is my second favorite oxymoron. Mr. Weezar, the favorite is jumbo shrimp, just in case you were wondering. And so it's easy to make fun of this. But long after we stop requiring these young people to volunteer, they keep doing it. The lessons they learn when they're 14 or 15 or 16 when we make them do it, those lessons stick with them. They learn the importance of giving back to their community. They learn the importance of being part of a cause greater than their own self-interest. So by the time we see them on our campuses, they're still volunteering. When they graduate and in their early and mid-20s, they're still volunteering. When they're in their 30s and 40s, when they have homes and families of their own, they're still volunteering because of the lessons and the values they learned when they were 14 or 15 years old. By contrast, most California high schools require a single semester of civics education. One semester, 14 weeks of civics, geography, and American government all crammed in to one crash course offered to them in 11th or 12th grade. And I worry that the message we're sending California's next generation of leaders is that this politics stuff, this government stuff, this democracy stuff is so unimportant. We're not going to bother teaching it to you for your first 10 years of school. Then we're going to throw it at you at the last minute. And then 18 months later, we want you to be responsible citizens and voters. And for every amazing young person like these students from East LA who are coming here on their own time and of their own volition tonight, there's dozens, if not hundreds, of their colleagues and compatriots who aren't lazy, who aren't stupid, but never had someone take the time to teach them in their formative years why this is so important. And I would suggest to you that along with the consolidation of elections, which I know is and should be your primary focus, the most valuable thing I believe that the Los Angeles City Council can do is work with LAUSD and the school board to dramatically not only expand civics education in our schools, downward from 11th and 12th grade to 9th and 10th into 7th and 8th grade, but to link it directly to this volunteer activity that our young people are already involved. So rather than seeing politics as this strange, weird, and foreign thing for other people, for old people, they see it as a natural and logical extension of the volunteer work they're already doing in their communities. So by all means, let's consolidate the elections and let's talk more about how important that is. But I hope one other takeaway from this conversation is what needs to be done to prepare California's next generation of political leaders to take on those responsibilities when they turn 18 years old.
Thank you. You know, I'll just share with you, I was having a conversation today about that with my executive assistant. And I won't say how old I am, but I'm old. But I flash back to when I was 11 or 12 years old in a barbershop. I remember what chair I was in, and there was two adults having a debate on who would step in and replace a mayor if something occurred. They were all over the place and did not have the answer. They thought it was the lieutenant governor. I mean, and I'm remembering this, and here I am, 11 years old. I speak from my chair, getting my bowl cut, and I indicated that it would be the president that would step in for the mayor and the lieutenant governor. I mean, I was 11. I started with civics, I want to say, at the 6th grade. It was different. And so I hear you. And for me, I remember an exact instance when I was able to use the lessons that I was taught. And I don't know where that came from. I may never remember anything again from when I was 11, but I remembered that.
There's a recent study from the Pew Charitable Trust that showed that almost twice as many Americans know that Randy Jackson was a judge on American Idol than know that John Roberts is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. It seems to me we have two options. One is to ridicule our fellow Americans for their lack of knowledge, or to make an additional effort to teach the youngest Americans what they need to know, the same way you learned when you were young.
Thank you very much. And yes, go ahead, Mr. LeBon.
I like some of your comments. I was on Mayor Bradley's Youth Council in 1974, along with Mark Thomas. I don't know if you know who Mark Thomas is. Mark Ridley Thomas?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I just wanted to see I want to see the affirm. I knew you knew. And Wendy Gruhl was later on there, Paul Koretz, Ed Reyes, a lot of us. And I think every mayor should have a youth council. And when you spoke of students, every student body president should be down here once a year in some form or fashion. Also, I graduated from LA Unified Schools, and I went to Saturday skills class. And I know there's a push. We're going to do a motion, maybe you could second it, Mr. President, to look at Saturday skills class where we could do that. And some of the greatest teachers are retired, dedicated public employees who still love their city. One of the greatest guys in the world is a guy named Jerry Gaywee, who goes to Africa every year to build water lines. He was the head of the water system at DWP. He's committed to doing good. So what you talk about volunteerism, I'll give you an A+ there, Professor. Thank you.
Fight on.
Thank you. And Ms. Pack, I want you to feel free. If you want to chime in, just jump in, okay? You have every right that members of this committee has. Now I'd like to call on another unbelievably wise individual that has been engaged in government in one form or another for a very long time. In fact, you and Mr. Schnurr used to collaborate as professors or teachers. So I really appreciate all of you taking the time, and Derry, I appreciate that. So if you could give us your thoughts, and then I'm going to get a couple of more public comment cards and we'll move on.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I knew you as Mr. Speaker, of course.
Yes, you did.
And it's true, Dan and I did co-teach at Berkeley for a couple of years, but he never showed up for class. So we separated, and he had his section and I had my section. And we've taught together at USC for, I guess it's year 11 for me. I don't know if it's for you. So we go back a long way. You know, I've been listening to everything that's been said here, and it's all true. I mean, there's nothing I don't think any of us would disagree with. I've been involved in politics for a long time. The first campaign I ever ran was a campaign for Congress during the first election when people who were under 21 could vote, 18, 19, and 20. That's how old I am. And we all thought in 1972, this is during the Vietnam War, that giving 18, 19, and 20-year-olds the right to vote would make a big difference, and they would turn out in droves because of the war, and they did not. And I think that I want to, in my comments today, take this from a slightly different angle, if that's okay. Because again,
yes, go right ahead.
That's said here is true, but the real question, obviously what you're facing, is what are we going to do about this, and how are we going to do it? You know, I've run statewide campaigns, I've run legislative campaigns, I've run 4 LAUSD school bonds when Mr. Weezar was on the school board, run 2 LACCD bonds for new buildings at places like East LA, and of course I teach now with Dan at USC, and I think it's important to say something that is maybe not directly part of this dialogue, but I think it's important to say it. I think you and the members of the council are to be commended, and I'm not doing this to blow smoke at you, for the fact that you're having a discussion about how to get more people to vote. Because the history in this country has been, for much of the time, that we say everybody's got a right to vote, and then we figure out ways to make sure they don't vote. Whether you want to go back to the literacy test and the poll taxes and those kinds of things. But the discussion is going on, not in LA, but it's going on in Wisconsin and Texas and other places, about how to deny the right to vote to people who don't have easy access to a photo ID. So I want to step back and get up to 30,000 feet and say that this council deserves a lot of credit, you deserve a lot of credit, for having a discussion about how do we increase voter participation, not how do we squelch it. A good example is when cities elect their city councils at large rather than by council.
Yeah.
So we're having a different discussion here, and I think it's just very important for the record to note that that's true. When you have 20% turnout or 23% turnout, and you want to change that, I think there's 3 things that you need to look at. The commission did great work, and again, everything that's been suggested here is true. We need to incentivize people to vote. We need to make it easier to vote, but specifically, again, at 30,000 feet, I think we need to acknowledge that the way people live their day-to-day lives today is very different than the way we lived them in the past. Technological change has affected everything we do very, very dramatically. You ask the people of the LA Times what their readership is like. People don't get their news from newspapers anymore. You ask somebody who used to own a bookstore what happened. Well, Amazon happened. 2/3 of the world has access to a cell phone. 1/3 of the world has access to the internet. And that's worldwide with a lot of countries that are very much developing countries. And I think that if you're going to have this discussion, it's important to step back and say, not what does the electoral process look like from the point of view of those of us in the process, what does it look like from the point of view of voters? And their world is changing very, very, very quickly. I think we need to accommodate that when we think about how we're going to attack this problem of low voter participation. And one of the things that we have to do is that we have to make voter participation easy. We've talked about the fact, Fernando said, the single most important thing we could do is to have the municipal elections in June and November of even-numbered years. Well, that's true. Why is it true? It's true because we confuse voters terribly. That's why it's true. We have to bring the elections to voters. We can't expect them to come to us. It's like anything else. We have to make it easy for them to know when the elections are. And my experience having run all these races, and particularly when you talk about LAUSD races, and Mr. Weezar is familiar with that, is that most voters have no idea when municipal elections are being held. They just don't know. Doesn't mean they don't care. They don't know. So a June, November of even-numbered years schedule makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of problems with it. I get there's a lot of problems implementing that, but the fact is voters are used to voting in June and November. And that's when you're going to get turnout. The numbers are obvious. Turnout doubles. But I think that we have to make voting easier in a lot of other ways. I mean, Jack Welch, who was the chairman of General Electric, said that if the rate of change in your institution is slower than the rate of change in the world around you, the institution's going to die. And when you look at 23% turnout, you could argue that participation in the political process is perilously low. It suggests people don't care enough to vote. And we've got to change that, because the longer-term issue here is the success of our democracy. It really is. I don't want to be silly about this, but it is. We're just not getting participation. So one thing we have to do is say, all right, what does the world look like from an ordinary person living their ordinary life, and how do we accommodate voting in their ordinary life? Dan talked about, you talked about internet voting, or was it Fernando? Fernando talked about internet voting. Of course. Now, there's a lot of security problems. Every time, Chase Bank reveals that whatever it is, X million dollars accounts have been hacked, everybody says, oh no, we can't vote on the internet. Well, the world lives on the internet. We're going to have to figure out how to do something that accommodates that. Security issues are very real, but we can't sit here and ignore internet voting. We can't sit here and ignore touchscreen voting. We can't sit here and ignore the fact that the rest of the world is doing business in ways that the electoral process in this country just simply doesn't reflect. Not easy, not going to happen early on, but ultimately that's where we have to get. We can increase voting by mail. We can increase early voting. There's a lot of things that we can do. We can talk about specifics. Again, I'm deliberately talking in broad brushes here. But at the end of the day, I would just submit to you that you need to think about FedEx and the Postal Service. And FedEx figures out what its clients need, and it delivers those services. We all, I think, find FedEx, and I'm not, I don't own any FedEx stock, a very easy company to do business with. The Postal Service says, these are our rules, these are our regulations, you'll do it our way, or you won't do it. And so their hours are very limited, their service is not very good, the lines are very long, and the Postal Service is going out of business. And to some extent, I think we need to look at the electoral process using that as an analogy. We have got to be FedEx. We've got to go to the voters. We have to make it interesting for voters. The lottery is an idea that certainly is controversial, but first of all, it rewards voters for participating in the process. Second of all, maybe if executed properly, it puts a little fun into the voting process. The material that voters see shouldn't look like it was printed in the Soviet Union 20 years ago. It should be more attractive to voters. There's a lot of things we can do if we say to ourselves that the mission here isn't to get from 23% turnout to 45% turnout. The mission here is to take the electoral process into the 21st century.
Okay. I just want to ask a quick question, because you brought up, voting and voting by mail. Professor Guerra, you talked about a list of the 30-plus recommendations, and from 2 all the way to the last would, in your opinion, assist, but that the first one, which is the consolidation, would be the big ship. But I was curious, because this kind of made sense to me if it was affordable, and we asked that question of our CAO and CLA's office, how much would it cost the city if we had prepaid postage on the vote by mail forms or what have you? So the report that I got back suggested it would cost about $840,000. In the large scheme of things, that's really not that much. But if we were to make that investment, do we have any gauge as to how much that would increase turnout?
There is no study to indicate that.
Okay.
We haven't tested that. My guess is that it would help, but I don't think it would be a tremendous increase. I don't think the stamp in and of itself prevents individuals from voting once they have that material with them. And so, I actually talked to Dean Logan about this, and he gave me a number, but I'm sorry that I can't forget. Sorry that I have forgotten what the number was in terms of the cost. So it's easy to get the bulk rate when they send it out, but when they come back, it costs them a little bit more. But this is another one of those ideas that we're very much in favor of something like that, because it might help a couple of hundred, 1,000 particular voters. That it would make a difference for some people. Okay?
Please just jump in.
So-
This is not just for Fernando.
I don't know that there's been any scientific study, so I would agree. This is something to look into. But I know two things. One is that we see that those people who've signed up to receive vote-by-mail ballots, so they get the ballot automatically. They don't have to go and ask for it, right? Their voter participation rates are much, much higher than the people who have to request it or show up to a poll site. Okay, that's number one. Number two, we also know that there is a whole generation of people who, if you ask them to go and put a stamp onto a piece of mail, that's a foreign concept for them. Where do I go? I don't know. I don't do that. I go to Amazon and I click my credit card. So one of the things that Dean talks about is, I do think that prepaid postage will help, right? Because it'll be one less step for people to do. But we also have to acknowledge that there is going to be a generational shift at some point, and mailing back ballots is not going to be the way that people vote. That said, I do think that giving people the option of receiving their ballot automatically without having to ask, I think that's really a smart idea. I think that if there's prepaid postage for them to return their ballot, I think you make it a lot easier. And I think for those people who have special assistance needs, whether that's voters with disabilities or voters who need language assistance, a lot of times getting that kind of help in your own home from your family or a next-door neighbor is a great way to bridge that gap without feeling the embarrassment of going to a poll site and struggling to figure out how things work. So that can be a very helpful thing, particularly for our voters who have the greatest needs.
Thank you. Dan, did you want to?
Just one very quick point of information, Mr. President. In many states, California not being one of them, voters can download their absentee ballot online and print it off. And so rather than expending the postage of mailing out those ballots to tens, hundreds of thousands of people, it's simply available for them online. While that's still a step short of online voting, which, as Fernando and Derry both noted, has significant security considerations, the act of transmitting and downloading and printing a blank ballot is something that can be a tremendous cost saver and tremendously increase convenience.
Thank you. Derry?
Again, the point is to make it accessible, right, for voters, make it easy for voters. I live in a district where the polling place keeps changing. It's never in the same place. It's in somebody's garage. Why don't we allow people to vote where they are, not where they have to get to, right? I mean, the notion of putting polling places in places where people work and you've got to show what precinct you're in makes a certain amount of sense, because the lives of certainly Angelenos don't lend themselves to getting in the car and going and looking for the polling place on a work day. It just doesn't work right. I mean, there's a whole discussion about voting on a day different than Tuesday, but you can fix that with vote by mail and with early voting. But the actual polling place in my precinct is inaccessible because it's about, probably at the moment, the polling place is a 10-minute drive, and it keeps changing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. You want to disincentivize people to vote, that's one way to do it.
I got you.
And once again,
Mr. Labange?
The county elections are at one place, the city or another. The best I saw in my lifetime was the first 2008 election for Barack Obama. All polls were consolidated, like 5 precincts at the Silver Lake Rec Center. And the challenge for a city-county is if the city council district is not in the physical rec center, but where you sit, like that, the other side of the street, you can't have the poll there. So there's some things there. But and when you said that, central libraries, every library should be it. Downtown, you should maybe have some mega centers where you could go, show where you live, and vote, by that. So.
Yeah, we make that recommendation, and we believe that will actually be quite feasible in the near future, given what the county.
Is that like your regional center type?
Yeah.
And in fact, the technology exists to take that a step further. And in fact, a registered voter, even again, before you get to the question of internet voting and the security concerns that it raises, the technology exists for a voter to cast a ballot from any accredited polling place in the state of California. If you show up at the courthouse and you're supposed to be at the gymnasium, it shouldn't matter. You can cast your ballot. It's logical to assume that if you can take money out of an ATM machine at a bank other than your own, it's just as reasonable to assume that you can cast a ballot at a polling place that is not one that is designated for you. Quick follow-up to that, and it gets back to the discussion of civics education. In the state of Minnesota, they set permanent polling places in high schools throughout the state of Minnesota. And for the volunteers required to man those polling places, they use high school juniors and seniors. Once again, taking an early step toward educating them and integrating them into the process, something that can be done with a minimum of difficulty and cost.
And that's in Minnesota?
Yes.
I'd like to, Andrew or staff, somebody remind me. I'd like to look into that. Okay, we're going to bring up two of the public speakers, and Doug Arsenault. Doug, are you still here? There you are in the back. Elsa, I see you. Come on up, Barbosa. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. My name is Doug Arsenault of the Valley Industry and Commerce Association, representing more than 400 businesses that employ over 250,000 people in the city and surrounding areas. VICA's long advocated for election reform, specifically the consolidation of city, county, federal, and state elections. LA voters are suffering fatigue. In 2013 alone, many voters went to the polls 4 different times. March, local primary election, May for a general election, September for a special primary election, and then November for a special general election. All of this after a competitive 2012, competitive races, and controversial ballot measures. While 69% of Angelenos voted in the 2012 general election, our mayor was only elected by 23% of registered voters. People choose not to vote for many reasons, but we may and we can fully expect an increase in voter turnout if they do not have to interrupt their personal and professional commitments ahead of the polls so many times. Our local elected officials make a lot of decisions regarding the city's business climate, quality of life, particularly lately. It is our best interest to make it as easy as possible for our residents to cast their votes in these influential seats. Further, the consolidation of elections will save the city millions of dollars that could better be spent on serving residents and creating a quality of life and business community attractive to new investment. We urge our elected officials to approve this common sense approach without delay. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kathy, I see you rattling there. After Elsa, I have another question to ask, and I'm sure you'd want to weigh in on this one. Elsa, good to see you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Elsa Barbosa. I'm the campaign director for SCOPE. And we really care about and participate and help lead voter education, voter engagement, and get out the vote efforts in South Los Angeles and across the city. And what we have been able to do is really to increase turnout and really focus in on expanding the electorate. So expanding the electorate of people of color, young folks, working class, and low-income communities. And so that's how we look at this effort. I actually do think it's a really bold that Council and the Voter Reform Commission have opened this up to really think about what are real ways where we double, if not triple, voter turnout. So we will be looking at, we'd love to hear more numbers and analysis and assessment on making sure that whatever we do actually does help to expand the electorate that I just talked about, that we care about. And we think it's really important because things like revenue, priorities, city priorities, vital services and jobs for South LA communities, Boyle Heights, Koreatown, Pico Union are really important because decisions are made to take away those vital services and jobs, and we want to make sure that we're making sure that folks from our communities are helping to make decisions. So I did scan some of the report. So the investing in outreach and awareness, the city staff really focusing in on registering voters throughout the city, partnering with civic participation organizations, vote by mail, early voting, those are all really great things. And we really need to talk about not just translating a booklet, but really penetrating our communities in different and multiple languages in many different ways, like the PSAs, like social media, and in many different ways that's not just about a booklet. So we're going to be looking for your leadership, and thank you all, and looking to see how this really plays out in low-income communities of color. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to have another quick conversation with the panel, and then I will call up Raul, Claros, Leo Porto, and Professor Sanchez. Okay, now, in order to consolidate elections, something has to be done, I guess, to properly sequence those of us that are elected. One way to do that would be the extension of a term. Another way to do that, which I ask questions about, would be to have elections for 17 months. What I found out, if we did the 17 months elections, we'd have to pay an additional $36 million just to do that. So just looking at it from a realistic point of view, that doesn't make sense to me. But maybe you guys could give your thoughts on this. It's my understanding it would be a one-time and one-time only adjustment.
Yes, in the commission, we talked about this, and our goal is not necessarily to have more elections and more special elections. We think that is part of the problem, and you've heard that before, the number of elections and election fatigue. Our recommendation would be in the transition period that a certain set of council members to make up for it, or I think all of them at one point would then run for 5.5-year terms one time. And that would be within the ballot measure, and I think both your CAO and CLA would know much better in terms of how to do that. But in principle, we would rather see one election for a 5.5-year term than one election for 4 years and then another election for 1.5 years. We believe that would create election fatigue and actually lead to lower turnout in terms of when you're transitioning that. And so we have a problem with that.
Anybody else want to jump in?
I want to jump in.
Oh, you can jump in.
I want that 1.5 years. If there's an extra 1.5 years, I want that. Mr. Chair, I got to go to the community.
You're being honored tonight, and congratulations on your honor.
Go Huskies!
Thank you for coming, Mr. Labange. So does anybody else want to weigh in on the adjustments, the one-time adjustments, or does anybody have a point of view?
Yeah,
Mr. Schnur?
Mr. President, if I can, I'm going to take off my hat as a political reformer for a moment and put on my former hat as a political consultant. When you and I first met many years ago, it was in the context of a discussion about how to reform California's term limits law.
Yes, I remember.
And one of the first things we discussed is that as unpleasant as it would be to many incumbent members of the legislature, I felt that not for substantive reasons, but for political reasons, it would be impossible to pass term limits reform unless you shrunk the overall number of years from 14 years to 12 years. Our mutual friend, Mr. Nunez, tried to do it the other way and failed, and I was proud to be part of the passage of Proposition 28 2 years ago.
Which was virtually your idea.
Well, it shrunk term limits, but created a flexibility and a continuity which we hope will be very valuable. And that was a suggestion, and that was an idea that you and I discussed, born not in principle, but in practical politics. Not in what the ideal outcome is, but what the best possible achievable outcome is. And I worry that while Fernando makes legitimate points on substance, I worry that convincing the electorate to grant additional time in office to council members, even on a one-time basis, makes the campaign against this proposal a much, much easier one. And so I recognize the costs involved of the additional election, but if I were still running political campaigns, which I'm not, and if I was running the campaign against this proposal, which I am not, an additional year and a half, as Mr. Labange was just chortling over, would make a pretty juicy target for me to beat that proposal. Longer, conversations to be had on the subject, but my initial instinct is the political challenge of passing it with the extra year and a half would be a much more considerable one.
No, I appreciate that, Mr. Strago.
Yeah,
Gary?
as Dan says, if you extend the terms, you run into the risk that the members are being self-serving, and that could be very serious. You'd have to just literally test
Even though the members had no clue that this would occur. And this wasn't an idea that was put forward by members.
I mean, my answer is I would give people the extra time and lock in the regular, predictable schedule as quickly as I could. It would not trouble me in the least to give people the extra time to get everything in sync. But you just have to look at the extent to which somebody could undermine it politically, which is what Dan said.
No, I believe in being pragmatic, and you know that. And if the council suggests that we move forward, we may consult with you again on this. But Kathy, did you?
I think that my colleagues have said everything in terms of both policy-wise. I think that it certainly makes sense to save the city money, and one possibility would be to simply ask voters as part of the question that we pose to them on the ballot, would you rather have an extra election, or would you, for that remaining 18 months, or do you just want to give it to the people who happen to run for that office at that time, right? And that could be a way of resolving it that gets you out of the notion that it's being self-serving.
Gotcha.
I will say that the other thing that we tackled was this question about what equipment we'll use in Los Angeles City if we synchronize elections, and who will run them. And I only say that it's important for us to think about that because a lot of the thought has been if we synchronize the elections, we could do the crazy thing that Long Beach does, which is to run concurrent elections. So city at one table, county at another table, using two separate voting systems and hoping people will walk from one side to the other in a room. Or we could consolidate and actually say, okay, county, let's use your voting machines. Maybe it's contracting with the county to run the elections, but that's a piece to think about. Los Angeles County is now designing a whole new voting system. And that new voting system should come online by 2018. And so I think that our recommendations were that we would put this to voters, but give it some time for us to work out the logistics and have it kick in by 2020 or perhaps later. One of the upsides about that is that some of the amazing things that we just talked about, so the system that we're looking at, it could be touchscreen, which would allow for people to choose not one of 6, but one of 20,000 languages if they wanted to, right? I mean, it's limitless because it's a digital screen or interface. The other thing is that you could have what Dan Schnur talked about, which is anywhere voting. So at least within the jurisdiction, or if we're synchronizing with Los Angeles County, I live in San Gabriel, I work in Los Angeles City, so it's convenient for me during the day to go and vote. Let me pop on over to that Los Angeles City poll site that's close to me and cast a ballot. Or I'm rushing home to my third grader who I need to make sure does homework, and just before I go, I pop into a location to vote that's not where I actually live. So again, I do think that if we wait until 2020 for implementation, we get the upside of having some great, very modern technology that will allow us to expand the vote in ways that I don't think any of us can conceive of right now.
Thank you.
So Just
Yeah.
2 points. One on the transition about whether we extend the terms or have 2 elections. I feel strongly that we should have just 1 election and extend the terms. But I also feel that we can let the people decide, so that when we put this on the ballot, that you actually put 2 initiatives on there. One says we're going to move to June and November, and in doing that, we're going to have 1 election, and then there will be a second election, and it will cost X amount of money. The other one is to just have 1 election, and it will save this much money. And then people can take a look at the 2 options, one that's going to cost a lot more, and versus, you could just take a look at it, and you just let the people decide. And while I do believe Dan is right that some people may vote against it in terms of extending it, I think at the end of the day they would rather save the tax dollars if given the choice.
Gotcha.
Right? And so that,
Gotcha.
so you could do that. The second thing in terms of implementation, Kathy is right, and we spend a lot of time on this. That is, if we implement this by 2018, we run the problem that the county may not have the equipment yet, or they will have the equipment, but they haven't tested it, right? And I'm the opinion that if we vote on this, let's say in 2015 or 2017, and say we're moving the election to June and November, but then we don't move it till 2020, that to me that's very problematic. People have voted for something and they want something right away. And then having another odd year election seems like, wait a minute, we voted for this, it passed, government's not listening to me, etc. So as problematic and as challenging as concurrent elections are, as a one-time transition, and it will increase turnout. So we have the typical city election in the odd year, a concurrent election, and then a consolidated election. A concurrent election will have higher turnout than our regular type of elections. It's costly, problematic, confusing, but it's still higher turnout as a transition. So I would be in favor of that, because I don't want people to be disengaged or feel that they were somehow fooled that they voted for this, and then here they are again voting in another odd-numbered election in 2017 or et cetera. I have a problem with that.
That makes sense. Let's spend a moment before I go to the other speakers on the concept of the voter lottery. Now, when that was first suggested or brought up to me, I myself thought that it was really kind of out there, but I believed that it would lead to a very fascinating conversation, and it really did. When ethics suggested that I look at having hearings where it relates to the lottery, I had more conversations with media and, people emailing and texting and tweet. I mean, I cannot believe how much time I spent in maybe a 1-week period. I believe I spent more time talking about voter turnout than I did in 6 years. Just that 1 week to 2 week period. So I'm just curious as to your thoughts.
Kathy,
there's no order.
Okay, let me go first. When we first started talking about this, almost simultaneously at the same time as the Ethics Commission, and we actually had an interview or two on NPR about this right before the Ethics Commission talked about it. Just to supplement your discussion about how many people, we tracked the press on this. There were articles about this in Qatar, Manila, and about 20 different states of the Union discussing this idea about, and it all said Los Angeles is thinking about doing a lottery. Okay? And I would say that about 80% of the comments were, it's laughable, typical LA, et cetera, et cetera. About 20% were, hey, this is worth discussing now that we think about it, And so the more I think about it, the much more I'm in favor of it for a variety of reasons. First and foremost, it piques the interest of individuals, and individuals start talking about politics that didn't talk about politics before. Now, there is no literature that I'm aware of in political science about the lottery. There's is actually quite a bit of literature about incentives with field experiments where they talk if they were to give you $10, $20, $30, but nothing that talks about the amount of money that we're talking about, either $10,000, $100,000, or $1 million. So it's hypothetical, what we're talking about. It's conjecture. And our thinking, and we've been studying this a little bit, and we're going to do some studies at Loyola Marymount University, the Center for the Study of Los Angeles, is that the typical opposition is that it doesn't sound right. It's undemocratic. It's not American. It just doesn't feel right that you should pay people for something that is a civic responsibility. And so it's a normative response about that. Now, when you then juxtapose that to people and say, but what about turnout? Isn't that wrong? And people, have that discussion. Second, obviously money has filtered throughout all our political lives in not only in Los Angeles but throughout the country, and given Supreme Court decisions, it will continue to do so. Third, we have lotteries that actually fund one of our most important civic institutions, education, and we have voted for that. And so the concept of lottery being in politics and lottery being part of public policy is already there, and people have in fact voted for the lottery. And finally, one of the major reasons that I'm for this, and this is hypothetical, no data on this, I strongly believe that it will greatly impact and greatly increase the turnout of young, poor, Latino, Asian Americans, and African Americans, and it will change the electorate. I feel strongly that that will happen, and it will get conversations going. I also believe, hypothesis, we don't have data, though we're about to try to create some experiments on this, that once you get the lottery and people talking about it, and they're going to go vote, that a good percentage, I don't know what that percentage would be, begin to say, well, I'm going to go vote because of the lottery, but let me see who's on the ballot. Let me start thinking about this process that I'm going to undertake. And so that's why we are very much in favor of continuing this dialogue, talking about it. One of the reasons we didn't talk about it at the commission, as I said earlier, is we actually believe strongly that it should be a nonprofit who does it. Okay? We love the Ethics Commission. Now, we do have a role, believe it or not, for the Ethics Commission regarding the lottery. If we are correct that a lottery would increase turnout tremendously, and we have same-day registration, online registration, etc., it could all of a sudden, if we were to implement it on a particular election, increase turnout, double turnout, and we would not have the personnel at the polls, the number of poll workers, etc. And so I believe that I would like to have a second lottery only for poll workers that the Ethics Commission could put, so that we can get more poll workers to come out and volunteer. And that lottery, I think, would be a lot smaller than what we were talking about, but maybe $5,000 that we would have, 6 or 7 poll workers win $5,000, but you have to work. You get paid anyway, but that would increase the number of volunteers at the polls.
Thank you. And before I guess I'm going to go to you, Kathy, I want to say that this committee, or let me just speak for myself, I am committed to look at anything and everything that would increase voter turnout. I have always voted and will vote as long as I can. Personally, this very country, a revolutionary war formed this country, and that's where we obtained a lot of these rights. For an African American, getting back to what was said about you had to pay a poll tax to vote. Sometimes you had to sign your signature just to show that you, I guess, were intelligent enough or could read and vote. And also people, like in the Revolutionary War, actually died. So for me, politics has nothing to do with this. This is just something that I believe we as a nation have a responsibility to do. And that's one of the reasons why voter lotto or things like, I'm open to have a conversation about anything. So I just So any ideas, let us know. In a lot of articles that we've received, I would say most of them suggest some form of a consolidation. They also talk about, this addresses the symptoms and not the root causes. But this is not the last thing we're going to do. Hey, we're going to consolidate the elections. I think there's more work, a lot to do, and I think we did touch on some of what I believe are the root causes today. So I just I felt compelled to say that because I feel strongly about it, and Kathy, I'd like to hear from you on this subject.
I don't have a strong opinion about whether or not a lottery is something that we need to go with. I feel like it's a young idea. It's got the same pizzazz as talking about whether we should legalize marijuana. I get it. I get it that when you talk about the lottery, everybody... I'm just saying I've never had so much discussion about voter turnout, so I agree with you. I get that it gets people thinking about it. So maybe we need to hand marijuana out. Or put it... Anyways, whatever. So I didn't say that as a policy.
Nobody heard that.
But I guarantee you that'll start the conversation.
This is being recorded.
Yeah.
We're fine.
Where's Mr. Zonizer from the LA Times? So,
this is a joke, media. It was a joke.
What I will say is this. I think we need to keep our eye on the ball. And there was a very specific and long set of recommendations that came out of the Municipal Reform Commission and LA 2020 Commission. And what everybody agreed on was we got to move the election date. And so while I think the lottery is something worth talking about, I think we know that the election date synchronization will actually double or triple our voter turnout. And so let's keep our eye on the ball. I would say that if we move our elections to synchronize with the statewide elections, that means that at least half of the time we're going to be on a federal ballot. When we're on a federal ballot, we're actually not allowed to have a lottery.
Good point.
So that's another thing. Right. And then the third thing is, I would say, I haven't thought about the idea of a nonprofit, but I do strongly believe that we should not be taking the money from the public trust fund that's set aside for public financing, because I think it's two separate reasons why we create that money. Right. And we put that trust fund aside because people wanted honest and accountable government. And the Ethics Commission spent a good long time talking about a lot of proposals, one of which was increasing the matching rate to really incentivize candidates to, reward you all every time you go out and talk to constituents and you're raising small dollars, because we think that a lot of people, that's what in their hearts they want to do, but it's hard when you've got the pressure to fundraise. So we want to reward you for doing that. And so I'd like to put that was the number one issue that came out of the Ethics Commission as a recommendation. Mm-hmm. To me, I feel like, again, I think the lottery conversation's a fun one to have, but I think we need to keep our eye on the ball. And if we were to talk about one ethics reform or Ethics Commission recommendation, it would be to go back to the number one reform that the Ethics Commission came out with, which was increasing that match to 6-1 and really rewarding candidates who go out and talk to their constituents, because I know that a lot of our folks, that's what you want to spend your time doing. I will just say that I think the one idea that I would add to our mix that I think is really worth doing and maybe doesn't require any changes of law is to look for as many collaborations as possible with LAUSD and the schools, because I think that we've really hit on something. I mean, figuring out how to have as many poll sites in schools, figuring out how we get students to the poll sites as volunteers, really creating mock elections during our elementary school day or our middle school day. These are all ways of introducing the idea of electoral representation to our students and building that culture of civic participation.
Okay, now before I call, and thank you, before I call on Mr. Weezer, I want to say this to Commissioner Pack and to the Ethics Commission staff. What you did was brave. the ethics commissioners are probably one of the most highly respected group of commissioners that we have within the city family. And when they recommended this, they knew that they were going to put themselves out there for ridicule. That's bravery, and again, it's for that reason that I felt compelled to have this conversation. But in all fairness to them, the conversation started out with the support of a consolidated election, but looking for something to do in between so that things could happen quicker. So that was their thoughts. Mr. Weezer?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. And first, I want to thank all of you for giving of your time to this very insightful discussions, not only today, but throughout this effort to improve voter turnout and improve our elections. And I just quickly wanted to address the issue of the lottery, because I know when we want to motivate people to do something, what better way to do it than with money, right? I mean, that instantly, it's pizzazz, it's people wake up, what? But to me, there's something just doesn't sit well when we tell people, well, why should you go vote? One of the first things we say is, it's your civic duty. Now, if it's a civic duty, you don't expect anything in return. And so for me, there's something that doesn't sit well, that if we want people to vote, we shouldn't expect them to get something in return. I'm not sure if I'm raising an issue that has been discussed in other forums, but it's just something that I really haven't put my 2 cents in this debate about the lottery, but it just doesn't sit well with me to say that, hey, we're going to tell people to go vote because you could get something in return. It's a civic duty.
Yeah, it is something that's the number one response and gut reaction, that it just doesn't sit well. Yeah. But I'll also mention that it's a civic duty to be on jury duty, and you get paid for that.
Well, hey, good point, Professor. I'd like to call on Commissioner Pack.
First of all, I'd like to thank the students who are here tonight. It's not easy for you to take time from your studies to be here, but you are really the reason why we're having this conversation. I'm representing two positions today. I'm representing the Ethics Commission. We're a very small commission of only 3, and 2 people are out working, 1 teaching a class. So I'm here to do the job of listening and taking back the wonderful ideas that you have back to the commission. The other representation that I make is that of an ordinary citizen who is interested in being engaged and representing the people. So that's why I'm on the Ethics Commission. During my day job, I represent 13,000 poverty level patients. A lot of them are undocumented residents of Los Angeles. So it's 2 interesting positions that I take. Our commission brought up the idea of lottery to increase the voter turnout, as you know. We're aware of the Reform Commission's recommendation, 33 of them, and we're highly, highly supportive. But we have a sense of urgency. And as the daytime job person, the healthcare provider of the low-income residents of LA, I'm looking at the spending. In 2013, for mayoral election, the cost per vote, we're only looking at the votes, the cost was $50.12. It costed us $50. The cost per vote for city council ranged from $7 to $166. So in 2013, we spent $62 million. Whether it was your money, my money, city's money, it was $62 million. Let me put that into perspective for you. LA County supervisors, less than a week ago, voted to provide health care for those people living under the 138% federal poverty level and still not eligible for any type of Obamacare. To take care of all those people in the entire LA County, it's $55 million a year.
Wow.
It's a $62 million election cost, $55 million for health care. That's why we have this sense of urgency, because there's a trend. There's an increasing trend of campaign spending with decreasing trend of voter turnout. We can't wait until 2020. We have to take any type of creative measures. And I'm positive that a lot of you in the audience, now that you know how much it costs to participate in democracy, that you're either going to go out and vote or you're going to support creative ideas, including the 33 recommendations that the committee made. But don't forget, time really is of essence. It's costing us a lot of money every election. Okay? I am here to listen to your feedback. I am tasked to take back your wonderful ideas, but I feel like the commission has already achieved a lot of small victories because we're talking about it. And LA is in the newspapers throughout the country and throughout the world. We're being called all kinds of names. I've never been called loopy, but I'm loopy for suggesting this idea. But as far as I'm concerned, it's whatever it takes to engage the public, to make sure that you all practice your vote, practice your right to democracy that so many people really fought for. Thank you for your time.
Well, that's why I commend you and your colleagues, and I think that Los Angeles ought to stand for something, where there's so many areas within the United States where they are literally trying to suppress turnout. To have LA stand for increasing turnout and making it easier to vote. I believe that in this country, the wind blows from the west to the east. So we would set an example. So I thank you for your kind words. I'm going to go back to the panel. I'm going to go you want to go to you, Dan, first, and then Derry will go to you, and then I'm going to go to my public comment cards. Dan?
Well, Mr. President, I think you made the most important point of this entire conversation, which is the state of participatory democracy is in such disrepair that any idea that provokes conversation is a welcome one. There's a man in San Diego who's proposed a citizen state legislature comprised of more than 10,000 members. There is a man in Silicon Valley who's proposed dividing California into 6 separate states. I have concerns about both of those ideas, just as I have concerns about what the Ethics Commission has proposed. But the fact that it has engendered this kind of conversation, this kind of interest, makes every single one of these a valuable topic for us to spend time debating. Like you, I have an extraordinary amount of respect for the Ethics Commission, for the commissioners, and even more so for the staff, because they put in extraordinary amounts of time. They do terrific work, and it is without any doubt one of the most thankless jobs in government at any level. And
yes,
for that, they
I'd
deserve
agree.
our respect and our admiration. All that said, I have significant concerns about this particular proposal. One of the biggest criticisms of lotteries generally is that they're a quick fix. One option, if you want to be financially successful, is to go to school, to get a degree, to get a good job, to work hard and to work your way up the economic ladder so you can afford a home and a livelihood for you and your family. The other way, the more tempting way, is to buy a lottery ticket and hope for the best. And it's a quick fix and it's a cruel fix, more often than not for the people who can least afford it. As I said earlier, the biggest concern I have about the lack of participation in our democratic process is not one of convenience, although there certainly are things that can be done, as we've talked about today, that can make voting easier and eliminate a lot of the obstacles. The problem isn't one of convenience, it is one of motivation. But just as a lottery ticket, rather than a good job, is a quick financial fix, this lottery, rather than the long, difficult, necessary work of educating and motivating California's next generation of leaders, is a quick fix. Mr. Weezar, I agree with you, but I go a step further. It's not just that it doesn't feel right to me. I don't believe democracy is transactional. My vote is not for sale, nor should yours be. And I may sound like a traditionalist in this regard, but I would rather that my tax dollars be spent on effective teachers and trained police officers rather than on bribing my fellow citizens to vote who cannot motivate themselves to do so under their own volition. There are all sorts of things that can be done. And the kind of civics education that I talked about earlier can and should be done not just in our high schools, but in our underrepresented communities. But a cash prize undermines the premise of our vote. Again, I have nothing but the highest regard for the Ethics Commission, the commissioners and staff. They do tremendous work every single day. And the fact that we're having this conversation is testament to the creativity and the energy that they've put in to trying to move this discussion forward. But while I certainly respect and agree with the urgency involved here, our democratic process was not set up on the basis of urgency. The reason we have a bicameral Congress, the reason we have divided responsibilities between state and federal government, was very specifically done to make it a deliberative process. I want political change to happen now. I want policy change to happen now. Our government is very specifically set up to protect against the urgency in favor of the important. And I would much, much rather invest our time and efforts in educating and motivating California's next generation of political leaders to participate via their own free will, rather than handing out lottery tickets, trying to bribe them with a quick fix.
Well, thank you. Before I go to Derry, I do want to say I have not forgot the members of the public. I will get to you. And what I'd like to kind of ask of you in advance, I think we'll wrap this up with a question about how would one defend consolidation. I think you referenced it, Dan, against its critics. So if you would think about that, and I think maybe that's kind of like where we close this out. But on the voter lotto, Derry?
Mr. President, I will put on my political consultant hat, and I will submit to you that if there is a lottery, it's going to get a lot of attention. No question about it. The first time we do a lottery, it's going to be reported all over the world all the time. You talked about that. And I think we need to think about that. I think a lottery by itself, with no other changes, is going to look like a gimmick. I've talked about in my comments the fact that the world is changing very dramatically, and we have to reflect that. And that's one of the things that you talked about. I mean, we need to do that. Just pick it. Bitcoin, I don't care what it is. Everything's changing, and the electoral process should throw nothing. We should throw nothing out when we consider our options. But the lottery, as a political consultant, might make sense if it fits with other things. I talked about we need to make the process much more accessible to voters and friendly to voters, and we need to make it interesting to voters. The lottery might play a role in making the election process interesting. But if we don't do anything else to change things, if we don't make the process more accessible, it's going to be viewed as a gimmick, and it's not going to get us. It's got to be part of a package, a well thought out package. To go off on a tangent for 1 second, because Kathy mentioned it, I am probably one of the few people in the room who have actually voted on a touchscreen, because we had them for early voting at the library, which you talked about, several years ago, before the security issues were raised. And in full disclosure, at one time, I had a client who was one of the manufacturers of those machines. Those machines have been discarded for security reasons, which is certainly fair, but the display of information that is available on those touchscreens is phenomenal. And if you took something like a touchscreen and you married it with a lottery and you put those touchscreens in accessible places and you resolve the security problems, you've just totally upended the electoral process, made it very different, much more appealing to voters, and that whole package might work. So again, I think the lottery is a tool. I think it's part of a broader package. I think we have to keep thinking about making the process accessible to voters, and once it's accessible, we have to make it interesting, and a lottery ought to be considered. I wouldn't dismiss. I hear all the concerns. They're legitimate. But in a context, it may make a fair amount of sense.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the Raul Claros. Leo, are you still here, Leo? I don't see Leo. Oh, I see you. Come on down, Leo, followed by Professor Sanchez. So, Raul, I see you've got some supporters with you that I happen to know.
Okay, good. Well, in the spirit of consolidating, we decided to consolidate our time because we want to make sure that as many speakers come up. Thank you for your time, Council President, panel members, Council Member Huizar, and members of the public. I'm the president and founder of the Latino Coalition that was formed in 2008, 2009 around issues like census counting, redistricting. Also have been part of many of the historical landmark namings like the El Salvador Corridor.
Yeah.
We're moving forward with Peru Village and different other designations. So most of the council members know that when I come to City Hall, it's to give them a full scouting report from the neighborhood. And that's what we've been able to do. Who's standing alongside me is Charlotta Johnson, the CEO over here to my left from Community Harvest Foundation, who's dedicated to our children and family education and wraparound services, as well as Sonia Saldivar, the Vice President of the Salvadoran Community Corridor, who works with over 100 small businesses. So when we brought this conversation to the neighborhood and wanted to get feedback before we brought it, that report back, we also partnered with some of our churches. Rashad Rucker from Normandy Church of Christ is here on behalf of our pastor, Thomas L. Thomas. We wanted to make sure that we got a full consensus. And we feel, the representatives here today, that we support the impact statement that has been filed to reform the commission and lining up the city and the county election days. We do feel that it's the first logistical step in enhancing voter turnout and voter engagement, but we also do agree that it's not the last. So we are very pleased with the panel's discussion. It seems like this is not just a cookie cutter discussion and what a bunch of fluff. I'm really glad to hear some tangible ideas that we together can tackle. With that, we do have some letters of support for the measure, and there will be more coming during the week. And we do feel that we need to continue the dialogue because there's been there's been the lottery. Maybe we need to get a bunch of taco trucks and pupusa trucks to park right by the election polls and be able to get those kind of initiatives. So it might not be the dollars, but I tell you, you get some food. I mean, we've held a lot of community meetings together, and people will come for food. So let's keep talking, let's keep researching, and let's keep listening. So thank you all very much.
I'm going to ask the clerk if you get, Erica, if you get the letters. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Professor, since you're second in line, I'm going to call you up. And Leo, you will follow him. Go right ahead, sir. And again, thank you for coming and bringing the young folk.
Thank you for having this conversation here, President Wesson. It's very interesting that I asked my students to read the Federalist Papers, and that book there, there are three thinkers there, Hamilton, Madison, and John Jay, and they asked the questions of citizenship. What do we do, to make sure that the citizens engage in this, what they call a civic conversation, where they can connect their own self-interest to the political process, right? So having a lottery, and paying people, I don't think, I think it's a silly idea. I appreciate that it's an idea, but you want to hear a radical idea? Let's just let the illegal immigrants in this community to vote. How about that idea? We do that with neighborhood councils, right? They don't have to be citizens, right? But at the end of the day, I talk to my students about the importance of voting. Back in the 1950s, President Eisenhower told us, if you don't do politics on a part-time basis, politics will do you. And the process here, most of my students that I talk to, these are community college students, that are barely making, they're holding full-time jobs, and their parents or they themselves are one paycheck away from being homeless, So they don't connect that to the political process, that there's some solution that can be made in this thing that we call the people's house, right? So I talk to my students about crisis, and crisis is very important, right? And this is when we need leaders, Every crisis, there is always opportunities, to come up with ideas, radical ideas that can pretty much change the political landscape in this community. LA has major problems with poverty, major problems with housing. The entire gentrification that's taking place all the way from Silver Lake to San Pedro to Boyle High is kicking out, is changing the face of the city of Los Angeles. But it's an important process, and I appreciate that idea and the conversation, and I would like to see more conversations. I understand that we're going to have another conversation next week, but let's just have the process. Let's not just have a superficial conversation. This is a crisis in itself, that demands more a deeper conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you again. Thank you for bringing the class. And I want to assure you, this is not the end. This is the beginning. I mean, we still have an awful lot of work to do, but I do think we can do this in phases, and a lot of what we've discussed makes sense. If anybody has a card, if you could give it to the clerk right over here, I will get to you. Leo, and the last speaker on this section is Mr. Newman on this section of our conversation. So go right ahead.
Thank you. My name is Leo Portal. Thank you, Council President, for this opportunity for us to voice our opinions on this very important topic. I'd like to share that the South American country of Peru has mandatory participation, which as a result has 98% voter participation. However, despite this great turnout, Peru still faces significant social and economic problems which remain unresolved, primarily because, in my opinion, because of the lack of government transparency. Government, in my opinion, should work very hard to actively make government simple and easily understood. While it is true that certain issues up for vote are complex, the general voter should be given an opportunity to vote on issues which greatly impact their lives. Elections, in my opinion, should be carefully timed in a manner that encourages voter turnout, such as voting on weekends as opposed to weekdays when people are often very busy. It is my opinion as well that some of the topics that voters should be voting upon in order to increase voter turnout are issues such as minimum wage, options for sidewalk repairs, issues that deeply impact the general public. I also understood that there's a disparity between voting and volunteerism. I believe that this may be due to the complex of governance, and then people just typically will get confused and lose interest very quickly. And I think that even some of the booklets, the description of what you're voting for sometimes can be too complicated. And if you don't have that patience, and if that topic is barely of importance to you, you're not going to have an interest to vote. So if we could just make things a little bit simpler and timing it correctly, I think would help to increase voter turnout. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Please, come on up. City Hall's own.
Excuse me. Yes, I do work for Paul Michael Newman. I work for an office for the city, but I'm not here at all representing that office. Thank you all for being here, by the way. Thank you. It's great to be here. First of all, I'm a member, and I guess a founding member, of the East Area Progressive Democrats, which is a Democratic club. It's duly chartered, about a year old, a few hundred members. And at the last meeting, we discussed the issue of consolidation, and there was profound concern, and I would say opposition. I think it may have been unanimous. It was largely based, I think it's fair to say, on the concern about down-ballot implications, and that people might be drawn to vote, but their capacity to actually engage in the entirety of a ballot, which is already incredibly trying, incredibly difficult, would be a cause for despair. We who actually believe in voting believe that it is something that actually should be encouraged, not just on an occasional basis, a rare basis, but that people should be interested enough to actually investigate and contemplate the quality and character of their elected officials and candidates, and should be encouraged to participate. I'm a founder of a neighborhood watch that has a few hundred members. Next week we have the League of Women Voters coming to spend an hour just discussing the ballot measures.
Wonderful.
I'm sorry, what?
I said wonderful.
At our cost, it's not a city, cost or anything like that. I'm also somebody, for the record, who's gone to Colorado and Nevada and New Mexico as a volunteer. I will say that I've also, 20 years ago, started a slate card that's still around. And this is a boon. I think consolidation is a boon to slate card businesses, because people will not have the time to think about all the things on a ballot. They will probably just be getting slate cards sent out by professionals, such as I once was, telling them how to vote based on paid participation. So there are those concerns. Also, I think jury duty the first day is not paid, I believe, for the record.
Thank you. And so now, as I go back to the panelists, maybe we should start out with some of the concerns that were just raised, and I'll let you guys take it whenever, whoever wants to go first, grab the mic.
I totally agree with the spirit of many of the comments, and it's all about making it simpler, making it easier to vote. Regarding Professor Sanchez's comment about non-citizen voting, the U.S. Constitution does not prohibit non-citizens from voting in state and local elections. We currently have several cities in America that allow non-citizens to vote in their city councils. Even the city of New York, up until 1948, allowed non-citizens to vote in their city elections. However, while the U.S. Constitution does prohibit non-citizens from voting for federal elections, they cannot vote for U.S. House of Representatives, Senate, President, but they can vote for anything else. However, the state of California Constitution prohibits non-citizens from voting in the state or for local elections here. So it's a state issue that could be changed. In addition, Los Angeles actually found an interesting way around it by having non-citizens can participate in neighborhood councils, which is a quasi-official electoral body. And it's actually the first time that we have done that anywhere in the state of California where that could be done. However, the results there are not very good. We have very small participation by non-citizens on neighborhood councils. Okay, and while if we were to allow non-citizens to vote in city elections, if the state were allowed us to do that, many would vote, but they would vote almost to the same extent that citizens vote. It wouldn't solve our turnout problem, but it certainly would expand the electorate. Regarding mandatory voting, it's not only in Peru but in Australia, which tends to be a little bit more democratic. We took a look at mandatory voting, and we didn't believe that was an issue that the Commission wanted to push. We were concerned for a variety of different reasons that I don't have to go into that. Just Leo makes the point about making it simpler, allow you to vote on any day. Well, frankly, you can vote any day right now. That's been done. On Monday, the ballots from the county were mailed to those of us who are vote by mail, and you will get that, and you can receive that ballot, and you can vote on any day that you want. That's a done deal. Almost any idea that you can come up with in terms of making it simpler, etc., the state of California, the county of Los Angeles, and the city of Los Angeles has implemented it, is about to implement it, or they will implement it. Okay? They are not, there are those structural, institutional obstacles to voting at the individual level are almost non-existent in California and in Los Angeles and the county. That isn't to say that they're not existent in other parts of the country, and we continuously hear about that. But here in California, I would be hard-pressed to find where there are institutional obstacles. In terms of Mr. Newman's about consolidating and then having problems about what we call ballot fatigue, that as you go, the ballot will be very long and that there will be drop-off, okay? yes, that will happen, but nowhere to the degree that what people believe. We actually have research on that because we have cities like San Jose, like San Diego, that currently vote on presidential elections. And their drop-off is, we know that it averages about 5%. Okay, so even with a drop-off, twice as many people participate or voted for mayor in San Diego than they voted here in Los Angeles. So ballot fatigue can be a problem. There will be a drop-off, but it'll still be a lot more people voting for mayor than if you left the elections as they were today.
Let me stop you for a minute, ask a quick question. Suppose we were successful in getting legislation passed in Sacramento that would allow cities who have large populations to be placed higher on the ballot. What do you think that does where it relates to voter fatigue?
I think that it would have very small impact. I think that what happens with ballot fatigue is that the majority of the people that don't go through the whole ballot actually stop after the very first one. Okay? And so a majority vote for president or for governor or for mayor and then stop. That's of those that don't fill the 100, the majority of us fill out the ballot. Maybe leave one or two out. But of those that go through the whole ballot, even if we don't vote for one or two, okay, of those that don't go through the whole ballot, they just stop on the first one. And so I'm not sure that reform will make that big of an impact. It will increase it some, but I'm thinking 1 or 2%. There's no data on that because we don't have an experiment comparing the two, but that's my guess, and I'd love to hear what Dan and Derry think about that.
Okay, jump in, please.
On fatigue, it's talked about a lot. In California, we do have a very long ballot because we have ballot measures, which can be incredible in numbers, but we also, something we haven't talked about, can't do anything about, is we vote for judges, and most voters have no idea what they're doing. And that's a real turnoff. The answer is to not consolidate. I'm going to say the same thing I've been saying all evening. It's to make voting interesting. When you're sitting there voting by mail, you have the time to do a little research. You can stop voting for a while, and you can go and you can Google and look something up if you want. When you're in the ballot at the site voting, you feel time pressure. There may be a line behind you. You've got to get to work. You're going to be impatient, and you may skip a lot of stuff. But the way to avoid fatigue is to allow people to vote at home when they can do their research, and also to make voting, I keep saying this, more interesting. Touchscreens are phenomenal at that because they're like looking at a computer at home. And so I think fatigue is not a reason to avoid consolidation. Again, I think we have to consolidate, and when we're consolidating, we need to begin to address other things that will make the process much more attractive.
Now, there is an idea, and Dan kind of touched on it, and it's a very expensive idea. The city of Los Angeles or the county could, in fact, order touch screens in every single one of their polling places, not as a measure of voting, but as a measure of information. So you can go to any poll, wouldn't matter. You can put your identifier, which is your address or your registration number or whatever, and it will pull up your ballot, and you can look at it, etc. And then you can press a button and print it, and then vote for it and submit it. There's nothing. The state does not prohibit that from happening. Okay, so you could do that right now, but it's incredibly expensive idea.
Derry, you want to jump back in before I go to Dan?
I'm beating a dead horse here. Technology is moving at lightning speed. And the problem with using technology in voting is not the availability of the technology. It's the unwillingness of the people in the process to try to accommodate it. We could fix this technologically in weeks. The technology exists. The problem is that there's a great deal of reluctance on the part of the present system to change, like with all things, and there is a legitimate concern about security. People are scared to death that elections are going to be rigged if you vote electronically. But this is how you address it, is that you make the information available electronically, but you still vote basically manually, and that gives voters a lot of... When I voted, I said I voted on a touchscreen. and I voted, and I pressed enter, and I got nothing back. And that is a very, very uncomfortable feeling. I get that. But you can separate making information available in an interesting way from the security issue, which is what Fernando just said.
And, I believe that it's, this idea, let's just stick to the consolidation, that's been around for decades. I do think we're at a point where we're going to have to deal with some criticism in order to make this occur. And nothing worthwhile comes easy. So I think I'm just about there. But Dan, I want to hear your arguments on this.
The argument against consolidation is one that we've just heard and we'll hear much more forcefully. And the argument is that important local offices will not get the attention they deserve. So let's break that argument down to its basic core. And the core is we are asking voters to make too many decisions. So that leaves us with three options. Number one, we have too many elections. Number two, we have too many items on the ballot. We can't have too many items on the ballot. Or number three, maybe we have too much democracy. And therefore we should take away a lot of these choices for voters. I'm willing to argue that the third option is not a tenable one. So either way, what you're left with is two difficult options. Going to vote every 6 months in odd-numbered years and even-numbered years is hard. Being confronted with a long ballot with federal races and state races and local races is hard. You know what? Democracy is hard. What's easy? Monarchy is easy. Dictatorships are easy. Authoritarianism is easy. You relieve the citizens of all responsibilities. No long ballots, no regular elections. It's much, much easier. And I don't mean to get too lofty about this. I already expended my founding fathers' reference quota for one hearing. But democracy is not supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be hard. And we can and should do everything we can to make it more convenient. Fernando's exactly right. We can and should do everything we can to make it more interesting. Daria's exactly right. But at the risk of sounding like a broken record, the issue is not one of convenience. It's one of motivation. And that's not something that you can accomplish in the week or the month or the year before an election. It's something that starts, as it did with you, at age 11, age 12, and through your middle school and in high school years. Are there things we should do to make voting easier and more convenient? Of course we should. But we must recognize that that's only a partial solution.
Gotcha.
We live in the creative capital of the world. We can recognize that for most normal people, politics is not very interesting. Because for them, unlike many of us, politics is not an end, it's a means to an end. And when we talk to people about politics and government, their eyes glaze over because we're talking to them about the means instead of talking to them about the end results, better schools, safer streets, better paying jobs. The creative forces that exist in the Los Angeles metropolitan area can and should be employed to draw those lines between means and ends to inspire and to motivate greater voter turnout. But we shouldn't fool ourselves for a second to think that we can make this easy. Long ballots are hard. Multiple elections are hard. Ballot pamphlets, by definition, are long. And there's nothing we can do to make them shorter. We can make them more interesting, but we can't make it easier. And I think it's important as we go through this process toward the necessary goal of consolidation to realize that making this easy is the wrong goal.
So to supplement...
Go ahead.
There's two more recommendations that I have that the commission didn't make, but we really didn't discuss, and it supplements the moving it to November of the even year. So right now, as the students know, we have 4 regularly scheduled elections in the city of Los Angeles. So coming up in April 15 and then May 15 and then coming up in April 17 and May 17. What we could do when we move the election to November of the even year, get rid of staggered terms. meaning that all 15 city council members are up for election at the same time, just like the U.S. House of Representatives, just like the state assembly, etc. There is no great policy reason why we have staggered terms. It is a matter of the progressive era, and a very conservative approach from my perspective. Get rid of staggered terms, all of a sudden you get rid of 2 elections. We would have an election every 4 years for all 15, not every 2 years for half and half. Okay? That would be number 1. Number 2, consolidate the primary and the general election, meaning that you would only have one election in November. No primary. The community college district that represents East Los Angeles College just decided to do that. So instead of having an election in April, then in a runoff in May, whoever wins in April is the winner. That's for the first time the LA Community College will do that this coming April. We could do that for the city council as well, and you would be a plurality winner. And now instead of having 4 regularly scheduled elections, each one costing you $10 to $12 million, you would only have one consolidated in November on the presidential election, which is the highest turnout. And you would save a lot of money, get rid of 3 elections out of the 4, and you still have the same number of elected officials, etc. So I don't think people, when I mention that, think it's a radical idea. I don't think it's that radical. It's just a matter of moving dates around if we're going to be moving those things around. So that's something for the council to consider.
Well, that's the reason for these hearings. That's the reason why 2 commissions were created to review things so that we could have an opportunity to vet every and any idea. So I thank you for that. I'd like to call on our last speaker, and then maybe I'll ask you for a couple of minutes on a close from the panelists. So, Mr. Moore? Of course.
My name is Ernest Moore. I'm currently serving on the Safety Committee and the Outreach Committee in the West Adams Neighborhood Council.
Yeah, I've bumped into you before. I remember you.
I'm also a founder of an organization called the Forgotten Americans Network. To be brief, going back to 1980 when I graduated from college, I worked for a survey company, and we were doing telephone surveys. And at that time, we did an in-depth survey on the election when Reagan was running for office. According to our survey, Reagan was nowhere winning anything in that election. Yet he turned out and won the election by a landslide. Now, for the past 10 years, I've been following elections and videotaping the candidates. And I see that basically all these elections are totally corrupt. And your proposal for consolidation is nothing but misdirection. My proposal is to change the election process to a visual voting system where people would come out to a public place like a stadium so that they can vote openly and it can all be counted openly so that we could all see who we're voting for. Now, to add more evidence to this, the last Bush was not duly elected. And that was very obvious. There's obviously total corruption going on in our electoral process. Plus now, I've been following the black politicians. Most of the black politicians, just about all the black politicians who are running for office, don't even say black Americans when they're campaigning. Why would we vote for anyone like that? I haven't voted for any of them. I can prove major fraud in our election system, which could possibly put most of you in jail.
Well, I think you should wrap up your conversation because your 2 minutes are up, so you can close. I'm giving you more time to close.
Oh, well, if you are interested, would you like to have a proposal for my idea for radically changing the election
I'm interested in every and anything, and when you have it in writing, please submit it, and we will review it. So, thank you.
I've been trying to contact your office for some time.
Well, all you have to do is submit the document. and I do respond. That's why now
Your
I
office
remember you. I'm not going to have a back and forth with you. You've had your 2 minutes and more. If you have a document, submit it, and then this committee will review it, as we're going to be doing things in the future. So if you have a document, please review it. I'd like to go back to the panelists and just get a close from the three of you, and then I was told that I have some cards of some of the students, and I will call on you after they close. Yes, sir. Whoever wants to start. Just closing remarks, couple minutes.
The conversation during the commission, during the dialogue outside in the community, and today has been wonderful. Unfortunately, very few people are having this conversation. Very few people are interested in this conversation. I know for many of us who are engaged, that's difficult to believe, but the data is overwhelming in terms of voter turnout, in terms of public opinion polling, when we ask people about their interest in politics. So we have to figure out a way to make it more interesting, number one, but then also to make it simpler. And part of being simpler is to go where the voters are. The old adage about why did the bank robber rob a bank? Well, that's where the money is. Why would we move the election to November? That's where the voters are. And I'll end with that.
Thank you. Dan?
Mr. President, thank you, and thanks as well to Mr. Huizar and to Mr. Labange for allowing us to participate in this conversation. As I said earlier, I think it's a critically important conversation to have, and I'm flattered to be able to play a part in it. It's been a fairly long hearing. We have a very patient audience here, so I'm not going to take up a lot of time. But I'll simply reiterate my support for the consolidation of local elections, as has been proposed, as a critically important step, as a critically important first step toward accomplishing our broader goals. But I would ask, and I would urge you and your colleagues to revisit the questions surrounding civics education, working with LAUSD, working with our school board, to find ways that Los Angeles can set an example for other municipalities around the country, to show them that our next generation of leaders are being properly prepared for those responsibilities. Thank you again for having me. I'm eager to help in any way I can going forward. And my last words will be, with no disrespect intended, not to you, but to the students here today. Guys, I will tell you that in my years of teaching both at USC and at the University of California, Berkeley, the single finest students I have had at both of those universities are not young people who came in at age 18 right out of high school, but those who fought their way through community college first. And by the time they arrived on a UC or a CSU or a private university campus, they were ready for just about anything, and those are the all-stars. You guys have amazing futures ahead of you. Your presence here tonight proves it.
And thank you again, Dan. And what I'm going to request, I hate to do it publicly, but I'm going to ask Mr. Huizar and Council Member Nuri Martinez to help me come up with a way that we do approach LAUSD, because I think all of us would be very supportive of some kind of civics class. I do not believe that I would be here if it weren't for that. Derry?
Keeping it brief, there are ways to provide those civics courses outside the school system in terms of funding. I'm on the board of the Constitutional Rights Foundation, which does this, and there are other organizations, and that's a separate conversation, but we could talk about ways that private funding can be brought to bear to get this done. It's very, very important. Mr. President, you were the speaker when what is known as the Pavley Bill was enacted by the Assembly, which was the first bill in the history of the world to regulate the emission of greenhouse gases from motor vehicles.
Proud of that one.
And look what's happened since. I view this the same way. The commitment of the council to increase participation in the voting process is something that's going to take a long time to fully implement. But the way to start it is to consolidate the elections, and again, to focus on making the voting process, as we've all said here, accessible and interesting. Those are the themes, and there's a lot of ways to do it. So if this is the first step in the journey of 1,000 miles, you certainly have our support. It's very, very important work. As I also said, and I'm not being overly dramatic, when you get turnout rates at 23%, that goes back to Jack Welch's comment about the rate of change in everybody's day-to-day life being a lot faster than the rate of change in the political process, and that's a recipe for some real disaster. So, short answer, I think you have the full support of the panel. There's been some tremendous ideas from the audience. In terms of East LA, along with Dan, I teach at USC. We get a fair number of transfer students. One of the students I'm very proud of was a transfer from East LA who took actually 4 of my courses at USC, which is pretty tough to do. I was his minor. And when all was done, and he applied to law school, he got into Harvard, Stanford, Duke, and some other ones, and he's a student today at Stanford in his second year. So for the folks behind me, the key is persistence, determination. Great things can happen.
Thank you. Mr. Weezer.
Thank you. And that student you haven't taught at Cal, you couldn't convince him to go to Cal instead of Stanford? No, well, thank you. I don't think we could have had a better panel, individuals who know this issue very well and very thoughtful. So we appreciate your time in this. And Dan, you set your own quota in terms of how many times you want to use the principles of the founding fathers, so you could have said it as many times as you want. So, but, I haven't heard one good argument why we shouldn't consolidate. The one we've often heard is voter fatigue as they go down the ticket and the local offices kind of get lost in the shuffle, whether it's when they're actually present voting or in the discussion leading up to the vote and the debates and everything else. Are you listening to the president or to the governor debating, or to the local council member? But everything here indicates that despite that, we do get the percentage increase for those areas that have consolidated, those other jurisdictions that have consolidated. So we get that benefit. Not to mention that if we do things that are more interesting when they go in, such as touch screen, etc., that would make it easier for people to vote, they will get to that bottom ticket. And also, something else that hasn't been mentioned is the data that shows that people don't like Congress, but they love their local Congress member. They'll pay attention to their local member. They know them, I think, a lot better than they do some of probably the mid-level tickets, not the president. They'll be paying attention to the president. But so they will pay attention to who their council member is. And I don't know about school board and community college. We've seen some issues, some data that people don't really can't recall who that is. And the data you showed us, Derry, when you did our bonds for us at the LUSD. But at the end of the day, I think there's no argument for me that would show us why we shouldn't go to consolidate. And Dr. Guerra, one final point on you pointed out the primary versus general. I think that's something also worth looking at. I recall, just anecdotally for myself, when we went to vote for a runoff for a community college board of trustee, and I went to my polling place. It was about 4 o'clock. I asked the people to vote, working the polling place. I asked how's voting today, and they said you're the 4th one to come in, 4 o'clock. And then they went on to tell me, and one of the ones who voted previously is your wife. So, so that goes to show that there's something there as well in terms of primary and general, and that could also, if we consolidate, look at that, and it's a future discussion point as well in the primary general issue. I think there's something there. Thank you all again.
Thank you, Mr. Weezer. Commissioner Pack, did you want to say something as I begin to wrap this up?
Yes, I learned so much tonight. Thank you so much to the panelists who shared your thoughtful ideas in addition to the materials presented in advance. Our commission proposed a pilot project of using the lottery. The lottery may or may not work, and it will not be a solution to the problem that we have. As you have proposed, we have to do a lot more than just a simple solution of attracting the people, a quick fix, if you will. Our commission supports the ideas that the Reform Commission supported. We just want the students who are here today, the engaged citizens who are here today, to take away the idea that voting is democracy, and it's your choice to participate in the democracy or not. And we hope that you will. Thank you.
Thank you. And what I want to do now, I do want to acknowledge Heather and Tristan from the Ethics Department that are here. I think that's wonderful staff work. You're here to almost 9, and you're not getting any overtime. People should know that. To the panel, I agree with Mr. Weezer. I don't think we could have come up with a more knowledgeable group. And personally, I thank you very much. I know you're busy. You have new twins to take care of. So I will, you can leave. I have 3 general public comment cards. If you'd like to stay, you can. But I want to give everybody a chance to speak. And I really want to thank all of these citizens, the residents that came out to give their opinion. I think that you've given us some very good ideas. And again, I'm very appreciative of you doing what I believe is the right thing, coming and voicing your opinion. So from East LA, I think, maybe not, I have, I believe, a Miss Garcia with an H. Come on down. Followed by, is it Ashley Cortez? Please come on down. And Barry Levine, you will be the cleanup hitter on this. You will be the last member to speak on general public comment. Go right ahead.
Hello, my name is Hermenegilda Garcia. I am a student at East Los Angeles College, and it kind of baffles me to know that we're throwing money at people to vote. Why should we be giving such an incentive? Should we be throwing money at people? Not really throwing, but incenting people to go to school for something that in this country we're given, and it's great. People in other countries don't have such a great opportunity. And for us to be allowed to vote, it shocks me. I believe that it starts at education. I've lived in East LA my whole life, gone to school in Los Angeles, and it starts slowly but surely. It shouldn't just start senior year for a semester. It should start in preschool. Okay, well, here's our president, here's our vice president. And later on, trickling down, continuing. As a senior, our teacher was so great enough to give us a little ballot, and we pretend voted. And that should be given to all students, the opportunity to know how to vote and what to look for. And who's giving those certain incentives on TV? Okay, well, don't vote for this and don't vote for that, but vote for this. So I believe it does start in education.
Thank you so much. Ms. Cortez, come forward.
Hello, my name is Ashley Cortez. Thank you very much for having this conversation, because myself as a student at ELAC, since high school, from what I can remember, I felt very disconnected from the political process. I felt that 1 year in senior high school wasn't enough for me to grasp what's the understanding of voting.
No, keep going.
And what's the understanding of it. And as soon as my first class for political science in East LA College, I felt very disconnected. I felt because I didn't know anything, I felt like I wouldn't know how to vote. So I believe that using resources starting at middle school and high school would definitely help students to go ahead and, increase those chances of voting. And we can make a difference. The younger generation can make a difference if we were just more acknowledged about what's going on. And these resources would definitely help. And we can make a change. And we can be heard out. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. Barry?
Hello, folks. My name is Barry Levine. I believe the reason voter turnout is so low is that we, the people, don't believe our vote counts. It's apparent to all it's the money that counts. The Ethics Commission's recommendation of 6-to-1 matching funds would go some distance to help restore some of that confidence. I'd like to see that happen. Consolidating the dates will also help. The lottery idea, I honestly believe, will lower the quality of the voter, even though it may increase the quantity. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Madam Clerk, I do not believe that there is any more business before this special committee. And so with that said, this committee's adjourned, and those of you that are in the Valley area will be invited next week to come to Van Nuys City Hall at, I believe, the same time. Anyway, thank you all so very much. Thank you.